I hope you enjoyed, or at least benefited from, your examination of either all or three of the repetitions that you identified in the book of Philemon. So you have now successfully done work with one of the observational clues in the book of Philemon. In addition to that, you did observational work by hearing the book read out loud, by going through the book yourself after that, and making a list of things that jumped out at you and narrowing that list to 5. So you've been doing some really good work in observation. We continue our observational work now just to make sure you're getting your understanding sort of the process, and especially the difference between identify and examine and how to do examine. I'm going to talk you through how I examined another repetition. In the previous video, I talked through my examination of the repetition of sibling or brother/sister. So now I'm going to talk you through how I examine the repetition of appeal. So the first examine question is, how often is the word or phrase or concept or idea repeated? How often is it repeated? Well, some form of the word appeal is repeated 2 times in the book of Philemon. The first time it's mentioned in verse 9, and the second time it's mentioned in verse 10. This is based on the New Revised Standard Version. Okay, so I would have written all of that down. Okay, appeal / appealing. Question 1: how often is it used? 2 times, verse 9, verse 10. The second question is, in what context is it used? Well, in verse 9, it's used in the context of Paul appealing to Philemon on behalf of Onesimus. And the same is true in verse 10. It's used in the context of Paul appealing to Philemon on behalf of Onesimus. Okay? More specifically, and again, we have to be real careful we don't bleed into interpretation. But I think this is based on what the text says. More specifically, the first instance or occasion of the word appeal in verse 9 is preceded by Paul saying in verse 8, for this reason, though I am bold enough in Christ to command you to do your duty, yet I would rather appeal to you. So in that sense, the context for the verse 9 use of appeal is that Paul is saying, I could command, I'm bold enough in Christ to command, but I prefer to appeal. So I think that's part of the context. The third examine question for repetitions: what is said about it? Well, nothing particular is said about the actual word appeal or appealing, so nothing. The fourth question: is it connected to a specific topic? Yes, it is connected to the topic of Paul appealing to Philemon on behalf of Onesimus. And the first instance is connected to Paul saying that he could or would be willing to command, he's bold enough in Christ to command it, but would prefer to appeal it. So it's connected to that distinction Paul is making between command and appeal. Okay. I forgot to mention that in terms of in what context is it used, we could also say that in the use of appealing in verse 10, part of the context is that Paul refers to Onesimus as his child, who became his, we're assuming, spiritual child. That's not what the text says, though. So we're just going to say child. He became his child during his imprisonment, according to verse 10. So that's part of the context for that. And it's also connected to that. Okay. And then the fifth examine question for repetitions: are different dimensions of the word or phrase or concept or idea described? And if so, what are they? Well, I would say nothing in addition to anything else that we've already talked about. Okay, so I think we've done a good job of examining the repetition of appeal or appealing. So I wanted to give you this other example in addition to my example of brother or sister, to make sure you're understanding how to do this examine work. We need to really take our time in this because this is such an important part of the observational phase. So be patient with yourself and be patient with the process. And just know everything we examine is not going to later bear fruit. But a lot of what we examine does bear fruit, and it only bears fruit as we examine it. Okay, so be patient with this process, and I think you'll see in the long run that you're really, really going to enjoy it. I hope so anyway. I know that I do. So I'll come back in the next video and we'll keep going. I hope you're enjoying the book of Philemon as well as the inductive Bible study process. God bless.